Welcome.
Thank you. Great to be resting here.
Just arrived in Toronto and
Right,
straight here.
right.
So you have no car and no driver's license, but you love the road.
Yes. And
Please explain.
well, it seemed so natural to me that I was well into writing the book about being on the road before I thought maybe I should explain that I don't drive. Actually, in my defense, I would say Jack Kerouac didn't drive either.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
But it's such a marker of independence, right? There's driving and there's a
Yes.
great, yeah.
No, it is. But what it means in a constant sense is that you're in a car by yourself. You're in a metal tin can all by yourself with nobody to talk to. You're not necessarily learning anything except from the radio, which is a question in itself. And because I began traveling as a grown-up, as an organizer, it meant that, first of all, the minute I left my door, I was in the subway or a taxi, and I was observing or talking, which I am addicted to. And also, as soon as I arrived where I was going, then I was in a car with the group that invited me in the first place, learning the issues or talking about what disaster was afoot. It just seemed so natural to me that it took me a long time to realize that it was extremely odd.
You write about how key travel has been in your life. You give a lot of beautiful stories that illustrate that. Could you tell the story of the bikers that you met in the Badlands?
Yes. That was a trip to South Dakota, where I was going actually because there was a powwow being given in honor of women's originally equal and honored position in society and an effort to restore it. So I was meeting friends there, and I got on the plane. And I immediately noticed that there were lots of people in black leather and chains and tattoos. And I thought, wait a minute, Rapid City does not have a convention of sadomasochists, I don't think. What's going on here? But the guy next to me who was, full of nose rings and chains was asleep. So I thought, okay, it's just another mystery of the road. But when I met my friends at the airport and we were traveling, we could see that there were just hundreds and even, hundreds of motorcycles around every little fast food place. So we stopped at one and they explained that this was the Sturgis, the rally that we didn't know about, maybe listeners know about.
Big biker rally.
Huge biker rally. People from all over the world come. Something like 250,000 cyclists on these roads that are so straight you can see them from outer space. And I have to say, though we were quite adventurous women, we're a little worried about all these bikers. We've seen the movies, they're sexually aggressive or violent in other ways or whatever. But the very last day when I was going into the motel dining room trying to be cool, trying to be open-minded, full of...
Surrounded by black leather.
Yeah, right, chains and so on. But I could see that one of the rare biker chicks, an older woman and her partner were kind of curious about me. And finally, the woman came over to me, full hairdo and chains and all, and said, I really enjoy Ms. Magazine. This is what the road is for, to blow all your stereotypes and expectations.
You write what seems to be one thing from a distance. Maybe
it's something very different close up. And it, not only that, but it turned out, she said, isn't that woman you're traveling with, isn't that Alice Walker? I really like her poetry. And then she pointed me to her purple Harley, which you could see in the parking lot out the window. And she was so proud that after her husband's retirement, she'd finally achieved an equality, a partnership, because she had her own motorcycle. She was no longer riding on the back of his. And it even had Ms. on the license plate. And, and we were next door to the Badlands, which also are an example of what is very barren from a distance is very rich close up. And afterwards I thought, we all have a purple Harley inside us somewhere. We just need to get on it and ride.
You also write about travel that the road forces you to live in the present.
Yes.
How so?
For years and years, I've believed in and been instructed by my friends in meditation and mindfulness and never actually integrated it into my life. And I finally concluded it's because the road is my form of meditation in the sense of living utterly in the present, because for the most part, it forces you to live in the present. If you're open to it, you have to be in an open state of mind, sort of like a bird waiting for currents, because otherwise you could be on the road and be in a cocoon.
I was about to say, a lot of people don't travel quite the way you travel.
It's true, but travel to some extent forces you, because you are in such unexpected situations so often. So it's more likely to force you into a state of living in the present.
You trace this love of travel back to your dad. Can you talk a bit about life growing up with him?
That also, it's amazing how much one can learn about oneself while writing a book. Because I had rebelled against my early childhood living in a house trailer for the most part with my mother and father and sister, because my father was something of a gypsy, and he was very proud that he never had a job. He was, by which he meant he worked for himself. He was always trading jewelry and small antiques in the roadside shops, and we would be traveling from Michigan to warm weather, to Florida or California, and staying there. And at the time, I wanted to go to school like other kids. We see movies, we see how other people live, we think we should live that way. And I thought I had rebelled against it, but I realized then, while writing the book, that really I had repeated it, but in my own way.
You didn't realize that until writing this book?
No, I really didn't. Wow. I really didn't, because I had avoided other things, like not being constantly in debt as my father was, and actually he had no home at all. I mean, what I realized is that my father had no home, my mother had no journey of her own, and that we all need both.
Could you talk about your mother's influence? It's such an interesting contrast between what you observed in your father's life and what you observed in your mother's life. How did your mother's life influence you?
My mother, as I only discovered as a teenager, really, had, before I was born, been a pioneer journalist, newspaper reporter, and even editor at a time when she had to, at first, write under a man's name to get published at all. So, I mean, she really was a pioneer. And she had tried to keep that going after having my sister, who's 9 years older than me, and my father, a wonderful man, but not Mr. Responsible, and she just couldn't. She just couldn't. So finally, she gave up her life. I mean, she had what was then called a nervous breakdown and was in a hospital for a couple of years. And she just gave it up and followed my father to his summertime dream of running a little summer resort. So, by the time I knew her, I would say her spirit was somewhat broken. I mean, she still had her books and her poetry and her humor, but she couldn't always take care of herself. So she never had a journey, and my father never had a home. And it's taken me a lot of years of my own life to figure out that we all need both.
It is a universal struggle, right, between freedom and stability.
Yes, I think so. And I think actually all of us around this earth, from the Quay and the San, where we all started, were migratory. So we were always following the seasons, the crops, the animals, but with a group. So we had our campfire, and we had our community and way of learning from each other, and everyone speaking around the campfire. And I kind of think it's in ourselves that we need both.
And you said it's been a long journey for you to discover that balance for yourself. What maintains that for you now?
Well, I did finally, after 50, I have to say, I'm not a fast learner. I finally did really create a home for myself. Not just rooms full of boxes, which is where I was living before, but actually rooms that I love, and I come in and they have, old killams and carvings and things from travels and things I love,
I love that you wrote that caring for your home is caring for yourself.
Yes, it is. The home is a symbol of the self. And it's part of the gender politics, too, because women are frequently made to feel, I hope not so much anymore, but that they can only make a home not for themselves, but for a husband and children. And of course, there's all kinds of class and race and every other aspect to it. Can you afford a home of your own? But I mean, even birds need nests. We all need some place that feels like us.
That conversation, that tension between freedom and stability, in the physical sense, made me think of it also in the realm of ideas. Like, how can you have strong values and ideas to ground you, and at the same time remain open to change?
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's the more interesting thing, isn't it? I think that the same principle of balance applies. That is, if you are in a situation where maybe you have had more power than the other people who are there, it's important always to listen as much as you speak. And if you have had less power, it's important to speak as much as you listen, which is sometimes also difficult because you're used to hiding your thoughts and not speaking. And just that balance can take you a long way.
Yeah. I guess what I'm curious about as well, though, is how do you have values, strong values, to really ground you, but at the same time be amenable to having those values change, depending on how have you managed that in your life?
Well, I actually am not sure that you learn, and you certainly learn not to impose your values on anybody else. But I think, in a way, children are born with some pretty important understandings. I mean, they will say to you in any language in the world some equivalent of, it's not fair, and you are not the boss of me. And I always say, yes, that's it. That's the basis of every social justice movement. Thank you very much. And you just come to, I hope. The problem is that we're made to give that up. We're made to feel that hierarchies are natural or inborn, which they aren't. But if we hang on to that sense of, I'm not more important than anybody else, but I'm not less important either, then you can, I think, both keep your internal sense of uniqueness and your own values and value and honor those of others.
While I have you here, I've got to get some of your political insights. We're in a really interesting cultural moment right now in terms of feminism entering pop culture in a big way. We have, young actresses speaking to the UN, Beyonce performing with the word feminist behind her. Mm-hmm. What do you make of this moment in that sense?
Well, I think it's, a familiar moment, only bigger, because in the earliest days of feminism, the civil rights movement, it was kind of everywhere. It didn't really start in academia. It started in the street. It started in popular culture, much more likely. And we didn't necessarily have such good ways of communicating with each other. Now, because of the web, although I'm a little leery of the economic division that the web sometimes brings, nonetheless, it can catch fire. And I notice it now because I've been on this book tour very intensely. And in a funny way, it feels like coming home. It feels like a bigger version of the huge ahas that were going on in the beginning.
Interesting. At the same time, there's some critics of this pop culture feminism. I talked with Andy Zeisler from Bitch Magazine, for example, and she voiced some concerns that in the effort to popularize feminism, it's become depoliticized in certain important ways. What do you think about that sort of concern?
I don't think Beyonce is going to vote for a Republican. No, I don't. We have to. We have an arc of learning, each one of us. So, I suppose there is a danger of excusing any behavior by saying, "Well, I chose it," no matter how self-destructive or destructive of others it may be. That would be, I agree
I think
with
that's
you.
what she was expressing.
That would be a real big-time danger. But as long as we maintain the spirit of feminism, of all the social justice movements altogether, which is literally that I'm not less important, but I'm not more important either. We can hang in there, and it's the basis of huge change because, of course, our economic system is completely organized, almost completely, the other way around. you are more important or less important than somebody else.
Yeah, very hierarchical.
Right.
One of the things Andy and I discussed was the moment Miss Piggy received a prestigious Feminist award. You participated in that. What was going through your mind as you were interviewing Miss
Well,
Piggy?
here was the most amazing thing. That was at the wonderful Feminist Art Center for Feminist Art at the Brooklyn Museum, which is unique in the world and totally wonderful. And they honor various people, women who are firsts. So they had the wit to honor Miss Piggy, and I got to interview Miss Piggy. And the most extraordinary thing was that I was interviewing her, which meant I was standing behind a kind of desk, and the man who is Miss Piggy was kneeling down under. I could fully see him. And I'm talking to, and never mind, I was completely convinced I was talking to Miss Piggy. She was a totally autonomous human being. Never mind that I could see the guy right there.
So what was going through your mind then as you're hearing these answers from ostensibly Miss Piggy about
well, it was
feminism?
like a double consciousness, because I could see what was going on, but she's a person with politics and a will of her own. And I was responding to her.
I want to get your view on another surprising cultural moment, Playboy's a recent decision to stop publishing nude photos. You wrote about infiltrating the Playboy Club in 1963. What do you think about their decision?
I think their decision is like our National Rifle Association, the NRA, saying, well, we're no longer going to focus so much on handguns because what's the most mass destruction weapon we can think of? I don't know. But, because there are these, weapons.
Massive missiles or something.
Yeah, because they're missiles. So we're not going to focus on handguns so much. It's ridiculous. Mm-hmm. It's utterly ridiculous. They initiated and pursue a culture in which there are human beings who are male and objects who are female, and it's just the way it is. It's ever been thus.
It's a complicated time in your country politically right now. On one hand, there's anti-immigrant rhetoric coming from the Republican candidates in the run-up to the election. At the same time, there's movements like Black Lives Matter. Hillary Clinton is going to be running again. How are you feeling about this particular moment in American politics?
I think those two things. I mean, first of all, I would like to say on behalf of my country and in apology for Donald Trump that the majority opinion, if you look at public opinion polls, is hugely not a Trumpian or anti-immigrant even opinion. But unfortunately, that minority has control of one of our two major parties. So it looks falsely bifurcated, when it's really not. But I think they are connected in the following way. In very short order, the United States will no longer be a majority European American or white country. And indeed, the first generation of majority babies of color has already been born. Now, this seems to me a good thing. We're going to understand the rest of the world better. It's going to be more interesting. But it does not seem a good thing to people who have been born into a structure that says their sense of identity is dependent on race, on gender, on class, and they are in a panic. So they are against immigration. They are against even sex education because, as they will cheerfully say to you, the white race is committing suicide by contraception and abortion and so on. And they are in control, for the most part, at least of the primary process. They're in control of one of our two major parties, which has to end. It's just too dangerous.
Do you think that's a fear of a loss of power, or do you think that's something, I hesitate to say, more inherent? I mean, you write in your book about some people see the world as fundamentally welcoming, others see it as fundamentally hostile.
I don't think it's inherent. I don't. And here's why. I'm greatly heartened by the little I know about the Native Canadian, Native American, and also the Dalits in India, the Khoi and the San, and all the original cultures, the old cultures. And they, account for, 90% of human history, really. And they, in their languages, don't even have he and she, for the most part. Their languages are not gendered. they don't have a word for nature because they don't see themselves as separate from nature. They don't recognize race in the sense that, any way except visible. I mean, we've made up the characteristics. I mean, so I don't think it's in us inevitably. I really, really don't.
It's about remembering.
I think that that in our origins and in our cells almost, we long for the circle, not the pyramid, not the hierarchy. We are nurtured by a circle and not by a hierarchy. And we just have to have faith in that kind of knowledge and restore it in a new way. Obviously, we can't go backwards, but we can restore it in a new way.
In terms of circles, you write a lot about talking circles that you've experienced, small scale and also large scale, like 1977 National Women's Conference. What do you think needs to happen in terms of conversation, in terms of this discourse right now, and faith in our ability to have these conversations?
Well, I think we need to restore our nurturing by those circles. So do we have, you and I and the people listening, do we have a group of people who, not so many, but everybody can talk in a meeting and, a dozen people, say, who, however different we may be, share values pretty much, laugh at each other's jokes, want the best for us, and we want the best for them, just so we can restore ourselves there because we are communal people. And when we're thinking of acting together politically, I think we too often go for the big thing and say, we have to be in coalition, and we look at the top. Who do we know? Who do we have lunch with? Who do we go to the movies with? Who do we trust? Black Lives Matter has a great organizing principle. Move at the speed of trust.
And that's what you believe will help discourse right now.
Absolutely, yeah. If we don't just think in words that end in TION, but of our daily lives and the intimacy and of course, I mean, for instance, a friend of mine who is a feminist reconciliation expert or something like that, which she became because she ran 2 feminist centers, so she learned how to write. She was asked by one of the very big and important African-American women's groups in New York and one of the big and important Jewish women's groups in New York to help because they were trying to work together on something, and it wasn't happening. So she said, well, do your presidents know each other? And they said, well, no, not really. She said, well, tell them to have lunch together once a week for a couple of weeks, and it'll happen, and it did. It's not all about up there. It's about what are our lives like? How many people do we know who we, in a superficial way, might not be seen as the same as us, but we love and trust? That's what allows us to take risks together.
Have you had I'm assuming you've had many, but could you share with us a pivotal encounter like that with someone maybe with whom you disagreed or didn't initially have trust, but you managed to build trust through conversation?
Well, there have been a lot of moments, mostly that came from just taking a flyer, and discovering that neither one of us thought we were maybe going to agree, but we did, And in my case, in the beginning, it was because I was afraid to go out and speak by myself. And it happened, and I was thinking to myself, okay, I don't have children. I'm not married. If I'm going out to speak, it should be somebody who has children and who's married and so on. And the person I thought of was a friend who was running the first multiracial, non-sexist, as we said in the 70s, the child care center in New York, and who was fearless, right? And I was not neither one of us were at all sure that this was going to work. But it did, and it worked so well because we got audiences neither one of us would have got by ourselves. And we had a much better time traveling together. And we each served a function. You know, like I was way too academic. I thought I had to prove that we were discriminated against. She would drag me off in a corner afterwards and saying, if you're lying in the ditch with a truck on your ankle, you do not send someone to the library to find out how much it weighs. You get it off. So
nice little bit of practical wisdom.
We learned from each other, right? And so we're still doing this.
It's beautiful. Thank you so much, Gloria.
Thank you.